Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tell Me More, your chance to ask your desperate, burning news questions to the people that wrote that news in the first place. Today, we are joined once again by the inimitable Josh Butler, a political reporter from Canberra. How are you going, Josh?
Very well. Thank you.
As we know, it's 10 days now until the election. It is getting kind of scary. It's getting serious. Early voting's opened. We'll get all into that. But it's kind of that time where people start getting worried that, they still don't understand things. So that's the purpose of this hour. It is a no silly questions, no question too basic or anything you want to know. Josh is here to answer it all for you, as well as recapping some of the biggest news from the week. You may have seen that Josh is right off the back of a massive interview with the Prime Minister, which is on our Full Story podcast. So we're going to get into that in a second. Just so you know, leave your questions in the comments of the TikTok or the YouTube stream the whole way throughout. If you want to leave it on Instagram, probably just go onto one of the other streams and type it in. It's just a technical thing. Josh, I have to ask, Chatting with Elbow, how did that come about? Talk to us about it.
A lot of this stuff we put in for interviews, like you request interviews with political leaders through the campaign. The Prime Minister speaks to a lot of different media outlets. He I think sort of generally comes and speaks to The Guardian once or twice a year. Obviously, we wanted him on the Full Story podcast, and it just came around that the time that they could give us was last Thursday, just gone, Thursday afternoon. So we had about 40 minutes with him in our Sydney studio. We turned that around very quickly for a podcast that was published that night, news story as well. So with a lot of these things, like you deal with like their media advisor or the campaign team, and you just say, hey, can we get the Prime Minister on? Can we get the Minister for whoever, your boss? Can we get them on for an interview? Can we speak to them about their latest news? And they'll come on when they feel like it, basically.
Sort of when it suits them, they'll drop by. What was what was your biggest takeaway from, actually, before I ask that, how do you sort of go about just deciding what to even ask? You have this set 40 minutes, there's obviously so many topics. How did you go about figuring out what was actually important to talk to him about?
Yeah, it's a really good question because to be really like brutally honest, like audio podcasts, this sort of thing with you is like not my normal kind of day-to-day thing. Like I'm a print, written text reporter, and we have all these great people who work in different parts of The Guardian. Obviously, you and the video team as being one example, but like we have a great podcast audio team as well. So we sort of decided you basically get like one interview with the Prime Minister right through the campaign. Not every outlet gets one, but like we knew we probably weren't going to get a second one, obviously being like at the end of the third week of the campaign, but when that was. So we sort of made the decision that it would be really good to do it as a podcast, not just as like a phone interview that we would write up for just a story. So a lot of it was in kind of collaboration with the Full Story team. Obviously, Noor Haider was one of the co-hosts of Full Story, and so it was her and I on this podcast with the Prime Minister. We're talking, and we got together a couple of times in the days leading up. I think they might have told us on like Tuesday or Wednesday, basically, like we can that they could the PM's team told us they could come on the podcast Tuesday or Wednesday before the Thursday interview. So we didn't have a lot of time. We had to have a couple of phone calls with Noor and the rest of the Full Story team and other people in the business to kind of go, okay, we've got 30 minutes, or ended up being like about 35 minutes. What do we want to know that the Prime Minister can tell us that that number one, what our audience wants to know, what our readers, what our listeners on the podcast want to know, but also like from a news perspective, like what news can we learn? We're going to get one interview with this guy. What can we find out that's going to make it worth our time? So we asked a number of questions. If you haven't listened to it, like just to toot our own horn, like go and listen to it, because I thought actually it was a really interesting interview. A lot of people would have heard the Prime Minister talk maybe in like sound bites on the news or in like a 2-minute radio interview, like on, I don't know, Kyle and Jackie O or whatever. But like you don't often get, say, like 30 or 40 minutes with someone, like whether it's the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition or a minister or like, so like a premier or like a big time political leader. You don't often get that much time with them, and they often don't get they don't often get those opportunities to speak at length and kind of like explain all their policies and explain their thinking. Like people hate, I think you hate it, I hate it, audiences hate it, politicians hate the soundbite thing of having to like distill a really complicated policy into like 10 seconds or 20 seconds or something. So if you can give them, I don't know, 5 minutes to talk about a particular thing, why it's important or why they're against it or why they're backing it or whatever, I think it can be really interesting. So we asked him a number of questions about gambling advertising. We asked him about, what's going to happen in the election, what Labor's plans are for their next term if they win or they get back into government, what he would want to do if he was re-elected. We asked him about the conflict in the Middle East. We asked him about a whole range of topics. So I found it was really interesting. He was quite expansive on a lot of stuff, which you don't always get from a politician. So, it was an interesting experience.
One thing you did ask him about, which has been, I guess, almost kind of like a meme throughout the campaign, which is the idea that Peter Dutton's seat of Dixon is maybe a little more marginal than he would like.
Yeah,
we actually have a clip. I will get you to expand afterwards, but we have a clip. Speaking of hating sound bites, here's a soundbite of you asking Albo about this whole Dixon issue.
You mentioned Dixon there, and I noticed you were there on obviously the first day of the campaign, and you mentioned, why are you there? It's the most marginal seat in Queensland. Labor's putting a lot of resources into that seat. Are you going to win Dixon, or is that just to troll Peter Dutton, this whole push?
No, we're very serious about it, and Ailey France would be a fantastic addition to the National Parliament. She's amazing. She's an extraordinary woman who has come through a lot of adversity in her life and has turned that adversity into a commitment to her local community. And I think her values are much more aligned with the community than Peter Dutton's are.
Were you surprised by this? Were you? I mean, I hadn't sort of copped how serious they were about it. I mean, I know that Albo's not going to be like, oh yeah, actually, it's joking. But what were your thoughts?
Yeah, that was a sort of just a random one we sort of threw in at the end. That wasn't on our list of pre-prepared questions. It's been a funny thing through this campaign. Like the very first day, the very first morning, the very first media event that Albo gave was in Dixon, in Peter Dutton's electorate, which is in around Brisbane, just out sort of in the suburbs of Brisbane. And he was asked, I think, on that first day, are you actually trying to win Dixon? Like, what are you doing here? It's just like a psych out of Peter Dutton. And he said, and he correctly pointed out that it was the smallest margin in Queensland, 1 point something percent. Like it's on quite a small margin. I think it's really important to point out that like Peter Dutton has often been on quite a small margin. I remember writing stories about him in the last couple of elections, and like he's sort of always held on. And this is what Peter Dutton has said when he's been asked this kind of question as well. Like, oh, are you worried about losing your seat to Labor? Or there's also a community independent, like a Teal independent in Dixon as well, who apparently is polling quite strongly, allegedly. But they're, Dutton says, look, I've held on against, stiff challenges before. People always return me. Like it's always tight in my neck of the woods. But it was like, I don't know, that first morning when the Prime Minister actually went to Dixon, it was kind of like incredible scenes. Like he sort of jumped in to this random like gym class with Jim Chalmers, and there was all these like they were like a F45 kind of class, I think. And they just sort of hung around and high-five people, and it was the scenes just incredible on that morning. But the
elusive F45 that they've been covering.
If I was a betting person, and like I'm not for a start, and like obviously wouldn't bet on politics, but like I probably wouldn't. I think Peter Dutton probably will hang on. I think that's probably unlikely that he'll lose that seat. But at the same time, like Labor is sending all these ministers up there. They're doing a lot of events. I know they're fundraising a lot. Like they're sending out all these emails, help us, raise funds to get Peter Dutton out of Dixon. And I'm sure it's like quite a good fundraising exercise for them as well, if nothing else. But yeah, I'm not sure if that's going to happen for Labor. But like you say, Albanese's saying, yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to take him down. So who knows?
What would happen, and we've had a couple of people ask, what would happen if the coalition did win, but Dutton loses his seat? How would that work?
Well, he would be out. They would have to elect a new leader. I think that would be sort of uncharted territory. I mean, there was a famous example where I think 2007 when John Howard, the Liberals lost the election, and John Howard as the Prime Minister lost his seat as well. I would have to. I've actually been meaning to look up the history books on this one, to see if that's ever happened, where a party has won the election, got the most amount of seats or something, but their leader has lost their seat. I think that would be pretty uncommon. But I mean, realistically, they would elect a new leader inside the parliamentary Liberal Party, and that person would be the Prime Minister. We don't have a presidential system, so it's not like you're voting directly for Peter Dutton or Albanese. You're voting for your local member, and the party that has the most members in the House becomes the government, or the party that can cobble together the most people in a coalition is the government. So it would be, if Dutton loses but the Liberals win, they would have a vote, and someone else would get to be the Prime Minister.
For sure. I mean, there's their previous election, they lost Frydenberg, who was sort of, people felt might have been the sort of success. I mean, what if Dutton's gone? There's not all that many high profile, name recognition Liberals left. I mean, this is obviously a big if, but yeah, it would be interesting to see who might step up to the plate. Speaking of specific seats, we've had Josh Payne ask on TikTok, do you think that Macnamara has a legitimate chance of swinging green? That's the inner city seat in Melbourne.
Yeah, it is a really tricky one. I was actually talking to someone about Macnamara this morning. So Macnamara is you often hear of a two-party preferred or a two-candidate preferred count in the vote. So essentially, you might hear, Dutton holds Dixon on a 1.4%, 1.7%, whatever the number is, 1.7% margin, right? And that's against when they count all the votes and they do the preferential voting thing, and it's very complicated, but it essentially comes down to the last two people. The McNamara is kind of like a proper sort of three-cornered contest. In the last election, I couldn't remember off the top of my head the elections before, but it's always been very close, right? So the Liberal person kind of gets about a third of the vote, the Labor person gets about a third of the vote, and the Greens person gets about a third of the vote. So this time around, I think there are some, Josh Burns is the Labor member in that seat. There are some interesting dynamics in that seat. Josh Burns obviously is a very prominent Jewish Australian MP, a person of Jewish, Jewish faith. That seat is I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but quite a proportionately large number of Jewish voters in that seat. So the issue of the conflict in the Middle East is a really strong and sort of a very salient sort of issue in that part of the world. Kind of getting really in the weeds of it here. The Labor Party, I think it might be the only seat in the whole country where they have put out what they call an open ticket. So people might hear about how to vote cards and preferences and that sort of thing. Obviously you can vote whichever way you want. And I think I would say to people broadly, look at the how to vote card of your preferred candidate, but vote however you want. You don't have to vote the way they tell you to vote. But they give suggestions, right? And there is some small number, maybe it's 10 or 15% of people who look at the card and probably vote the way that it's told that they're sort of suggested to vote by the Labor Party, the Liberal Party, or whatever, right? I think this might be, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, but I think this might be the only seat in the whole country where the Labor has not put out which parties they would prefer to preference. They're running an open ticket, which means in most other places they're putting the Greens above the Liberal Party on their preferences. This time they're letting people choose what they want to, which essentially means they're not saying, vote Greens lower because of, community. They're in some parts of the community, saying all parts. In some parts of the community, especially maybe in some more like like among say Jewish communities, for some people in Jewish communities, for instance, or among more conservative voters, there have been some concerns raised about the way that the Greens have acted around the conflict in the Middle East. Not necessarily saying that I subscribe to that view, but
well, I mean, it's I think both of the sides have been pretty like literally. Oh, sorry, I mean like literally. I think both candidates have received a lot of criticism on.
Yeah, there's been a lot of it's obviously very fraught, and I don't want to kind of go too far in because I don't know enough about this seat. I'm not a Melbourne person. I'm not very familiar with that part of the world, so I don't want to sort of say stuff that I'm put my foot in it. But essentially, I think there is a very I think the Greens are a bit less confident about that seat now. I think it might more likely come down to a Labor versus Liberal contest in that seat. Maybe because of these complicated dynamics around the preferences and that sort of thing and the how to vote cards. But that is going to be a really, really interesting seat. I think Josh Burns might have, if he wasn't the last MP to be confirmed as having won their seat, he was like the second last. Like that counting McNamara took quite a while last time because it was so close, and they had to like do all the counting again and check it all and double check it and make sure it was legit and make sure it was all correct and that the preferences had gone the right way and that sort of thing. But I think that will be a very fascinating seat to watch, not just because of how close it was last time, but because of all the dynamics around the conflict in the Middle East as well.
You mentioned about the open ticket. I was wondering, can you sort of explain to the dynamic there, or like, am I sort of correct in saying that there's this question about potentially because Labor there's a possibility of it being a minority government that they might have to rule with the Greens, which they don't want. It would almost be better, like if it's not going to go to Labor, maybe they'd want it to go to the Liberals instead of the Greens, but then it would look bad if they preference the Liberals over. Is that kind of what's going on? Why do we have this open ticket?
Yeah, essentially what you said there is kind of pretty broadly correct. Like I spoke to a Greens person this morning, and they sort of maybe mentioned something along those kind of lines. Maybe like that they thought that the Labor was maybe not happier about not getting into government, of course, but that maybe it's really hard to sort of distill it into a couple of sentences. There was this concern about like whether they hated the Greens more than they hate the Liberal Party, basically. This is kind of what it boils down to. Does Labor, the left, the centre-left party hate the Greens, the progressive left party, more than they hate the conservative/centre-right Liberal Party? And I think that's sort of the question at the moment. I think this all sort of goes into as well, like the major parties, I think, are still sort of grappling with exactly what is happening in like the dynamics, right, of the population, the voting electorate at the moment. Like for a long time, it was 90-80% of people would vote for Liberal or Labor, and there'll be a few assorted independents, people like Bob Catter or that, like these long-standing independent MPs were always kind of around. But in the last number of elections, it's kind of gotten closer and closer and closer. And in the last election, I think it was around a third of the country voted for, this is something that Adam Bant says a lot, about a third of the country voted for some Liberal, a bit under a third voted for Labor, and then about a third voted for someone else who wasn't Labor. So that's the Greens. It could be like your local independent. It could be, Pauline Hanson. It could be Clive Palmer. It could be like the Teals, whoever it is. So I think the major parties are still kind of figuring out what's going to happen, what that means going forward, and whether this idea of minority parliament, which has only ever happened, I think, once in Australia in a couple of elections ago, whether this might be something we have to deal with more often. Like, obviously, it hasn't really been a feature of Australian politics before. Labor or Liberal always kind of get in on their own bat. They don't need to like deal with the crossbench in the lower house, at least. Obviously, in the Senate, they always have to, almost always have to. But you look at other parliaments around the world, like a lot of European parliaments, they're like a big mishmash of small parties with a few big parties, and there's like, in like France, there's like 10 parties in the ruling coalition, and they're all like, squabbling, and things get done and things don't get done. But like, that's kind of like the way of life in a lot of other parts of the world. It's just so new for us here in Australia that we haven't really had to think about this very much before. So I think the major parties are still kind of dealing with this and figuring out, like, is it better for them to like entrench this like duopoly major party rule, or are they kind of open to like, okay, well, say for instance, Labor, right? Labor kind of on a number of things kind of broadly agree with the Greens in a number of ways, to an extent, on a lot of things. Is it better for them to kind of like be a bit more open to the Greens, or to like be more hostile and say like only vote Labor, don't back anyone else, like we hate everyone else that's not Labor? Or do they kind of broadly, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, get on board with some of the more progressive parties? And on the right as well, like does Liberals, Peter Dutton's been saying a lot more recently about that he would be happy to have like a minority parliament with, like, I don't know, Bob Catter or Rebecca Sharkey, or other people, Helen Haynes, or some other sort of more centre right people.
I mean, technically, does the coalition count as a minority government generally, because it is obviously the combination of the Liberals and Nationals, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean,
kind of
not really. I mean, Albanese kind of runs that line sometimes, saying like, I'm the only leader that's gunning to have majority parliament in our own right. I mean, obviously the coalition is two separate parties. There's a couple of different parties, but like broadly, it's the Liberal Party and the National Party, which have different leaders, they have different structures. But like, without either of the two, like the Nationals, I think, have got about a bit more than a dozen seats in the lower house. The Liberals have about 40 or 30 odd. So like, that they would not come close to getting government in their own right most times, either of those parties, obviously, whereas Labor's got 78. And obviously the independents have about 20. So you add all those up, and that's what the parliament is. Yeah, I don't know. I never really thought of it that way before, but this like Liberal National coalition's been like a pretty
mainstay,
kind of part of the fabric of Australian politics for a long time.
It's interesting to think with the rise of the Greens, is there a world in which we end up having two coalitions that go up against each other?
Yeah, I mean, potentially. Like, there's been talk about that, like in the margins for like a couple of elections now, like whether there might need to be, or whether there should be, some sort of more formal understanding between the two kind of progressive parties on the left. I think the history of what happened in that minority parliament, where Labor and Liberal didn't really get on. Labor and the Greens didn't get on that well, and there was obviously been like a lot of animosity between those two parties, kind of before and after. The Greens have been very strongly critical of Labor on a lot of issues in this parliament, or this parliament that's now ending. This parliament over the last 3 years, Labor has also been very critical of the way the Greens have acted on negotiations around like housing bills and that sort of thing. So there's a fair bit of like animosity between those two. But I think Albanese keeps saying, I would never get into a coalition with the Greens. I mean, like, I feel like if he's going to end up, say, 2 seats short of a majority, like I can't really see him not knocking on Adam Bant's door and trying to figure something out.
For sure. Speaking of minor parties, well, actually, not speaking of minor parties, we've had someone on TikTok ask, why aren't the Teals just forming their own minor party? Why don't they have more seats currently than the Greens?
Well, yes, they do. Well, I think that it is a good question. There has been a lot of debate about this as well, like whether they should form a party, whether they should be referred to as a party. I think the one important thing is like the Teals kind of hate being referred to as the Teals because they don't believe they're a party. That they're
change the color of your posters then. Sorry.
Some of them are pink, some of them are like purple, maybe like there's a couple that are orange. They're sort of all very bold colors that stand out. But no, look, I mean, like the reason they're not a party is because they're not a party. Like they don't have like a president or a, the thing that kind of ties them together is the Climate 200 like funding model. That's not
Which is a sort of political fundraising group.
Yeah, like a
that backs
fundraising
them.
kind of vehicle.
Yeah.
Fundraising kind of vehicle. There is, I mean, there's been talk, not to get super in the weeds, but like that when they changed the political donations laws at the end of last year, start of this year, where it feels like years ago, but like the recent changes to political donation laws, right? There are slightly different rules for independent candidates versus political parties. And the Teals, the community independents, were some of the strongest opponents of those laws, because essentially those laws, the major parties would never say it, but they were essentially to kind of clamp down on the rise of Climate 200, like the fundraising vehicle there, and also like the Clive Palmer effect of being able to spend all these millions and millions and millions of dollars on advertising and electioneering. So in not this election, but the next one in a couple of years, there will be these rules that come in that put caps on how much you can spend and where you can spend it and that sort of thing. But there are different rules for parties versus like individual candidates. So there was talk about whether the Teals, community independents, whatever, should kind of like bundle up under a party banner so they can spend more money or spend money in the same way as the parties do. And I think as we get closer to those laws coming into effect, there might be some more of those discussions. But yeah, look, I think all those independents all have different views. They all have different backgrounds, similar kind of model. A lot of them are professional, quite successful people who can care about like the climate and about integrity issues and about gender equality and similar kind of grab bag of issues, but you don't have to be part of a party. You don't have to be a Liberal person or a Labor person or a Green. Like, you can just be an independent person standing for Parliament. Like, you look at like someone like Bob Catter or Helen Haynes or Rebecca Sharkey, like Nick Xenophon. Like there are these people that just get behind an issue because they're passionate about it as an individual person or want to be a really good local member. And I think that's kind of good. Like, I think it is good sometimes that there are people who just focus on being a good local member, standing up for their community, or pushing particular issues without like the constraints of a party system. So I think that's probably why they haven't at this moment. But I do wonder if that sort of stuff might change as we go along.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, obviously the US and the UK and then Australia, where we are, all have that like two-party dominance, but like that isn't actually the norm across the world. So we sort of, I think we wonder about that a bit. We actually did have a couple of people asking actually whether the what we are expecting from the Teals. Is it going to be another Teal slide? Are they going to do as well? Has the sparkle worn off a bit? What are we expecting from the Teals this election?
This is one of the other, I think, really interesting questions of this election that I would think there will be a couple of new Teal MPs elected. I couldn't tell you exactly where. Again, I'm not a betting person, but I wouldn't put a number on exactly where, but there are a number of Teal MP, community. I'll use the right with the community independent MPs. Again, people who've got like an interest in, say, climate change, integrity issues, gender equality, those sort of broad issues that people like Zali Steggall or Monique Ryan or Allegra Spender or Zoe Daniel have kind of been quite strong on, integrity in politics and that sort of thing. There are a number of MP, candidates that are running, again, often in Liberal-held seats or places where Liberal Party has traditionally been quite strong. There's one in Flinders who I hear, which is in Victoria. I think like Mornington Peninsula, who I hear is polling quite strongly. I think the most likely one might be in Bradfield. The woman's name is Nicolette Bowler. She's been running. She ran at the last election against the Liberal minister at the time, Paul Fletcher, who was quite an established veteran member of the Parliament. She got very close. Took a big chunk of his vote away. He's since retired. They've got the Liberals have quite a strong candidate in there called Giselle Kaptarian. That'll be quite an interesting fight. I think I think the Liberals might be sort of a bit more confident of hanging on now, just the way the campaign's kind of gone. Maybe it'll be very, very close, but I think they're a tiny bit confident of just hanging on by their fingernails. But I think she might be one to watch in Bradfield there. There's Alex Dyson, the former Triple J host, who's down in a seat in Victoria against a sitting Liberal MP and former Minister, Dan Tehan. There's a couple in regional Australia. Cowper, I believe, is one. Those are the kind of like the new ones, right? It's sort of unclear how many of the current ones will hang on. I would imagine probably most of them will, if not all of them. There is sort of this maxim in Australian politics that once a seat kind of turns independent, that it very rarely goes back. I think some of these old rules are kind of being shattered, as we sort of talked about before, like, the sort of conventions of the way politics has always run, or the way things always go, are being sort of like reshaped and changed. But so maybe that's one of them. Maybe some of these independents might go backwards at the next election without the Scott Morrison factor, kind of like weighing the Liberals down in some of those more progressive seats. But I wouldn't be surprised if we had a larger crossbench after this election. Let's put it that way. I don't know. Maybe the Greens will lose a couple. Maybe the Greens pick up a couple more. Maybe the Teals lose a couple of members from that cohort. Maybe they pick up a couple new ones.
How dare you suggest there's a cohort? Just a loose association.
Yeah, well, they all sort of sit in the same part of the bench.
Yeah,
Some of them like live in the same house. It's quite funny. They all so some of them are like housemates in Canberra. They live in this little apartment all together. So they're, I don't know. I was going out of my way to like sort of not refer to them as a group before, but let's just I think the crossbench might get a little bit bigger after this election. Let's just say that.
Yeah, the share house might get a bit busier. We have a couple of people where there's a bit of chat going on within the live chat about the third debate, the third leaders debate. Did you watch? I mean, I caved halfway through and started watching Conclave, but tell me about what happened.
Yeah. For my sins, I did watch the whole thing, and I've now watched all three of the three leaders debates so far.
You get a scout badge for that.
Yeah. It was a bit of a mission, but look, I think these debates, like, they're not really for journalists. They're kind of for people who haven't been watching politics before. They've been busy. They've been looking after the kids, or going to school, or going to work, going to uni, looking after mum and dad, whatever people do. Like, people are busy in life, right? Like, a lot of people, and this is like my full-time job is to read about politics and talk to people on the phone about politics, and to do all the analysis and stuff. And even then, it's kind of hard for me to keep up with everything. So like, if you're just a regular person going about your day, just doing your day job, like, it's hard for you to kind of follow politics. So like, all the stuff they said last night basically was stuff that you and I and other people in the press gallery and other people in the Guardian, other people in the media have heard a million times before about, we're going to cut the fuel excise, or we're going to cut your taxes, or we're going to, cut migration, or we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to build more houses. Like, we've heard all this stuff a million times before. So there was nothing really new in that debate. Like, I didn't really hear anything that was new or blinding revelations or anything that was really that exciting. But for a lot of people, like, this might be the first time you've really sat down and actually listened to Albanese talk for the last 3 years. Maybe you've never heard Peter Dutton talk. Maybe you've never really thought about this stuff before. And you flick around the channels at 7:30 at night on a Tuesday, and you land on Channel 9 and you listen to Albo and Dutton talk for an hour. They do serve a purpose, I think, and they can be a bit annoying, and they can be, last time was quite bickery. They kind of like, natted back and forth, and they were, you're a liar, no, you're a liar, you lied, no, you lied. Like, last night was a bit unedifying at certain points, but I think they do serve a purpose. So that they're not necessarily news generating like exercises. Like, we wrote a story about the debate. We had some people up late watching it. We wrote a few things about the main takeaways and that sort of stuff. But I think for a lot of people, like, this might be the way that you consume the news, or that you made your mind up. So this is why they take it seriously, right? Not a lot of people watch it, but the people that do watch it are sort of watching it for a specific purpose.
Well, I guess that's what I was wondering in terms of what's the crossover between people who would spend a Tuesday night listening to the leaders debate and people who haven't already made up their minds?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think I couldn't answer that off the top of my head, but like, I'm sure there'll be people who tune in to watch their preferred candidate and to, go Alba or go Dutton or, to cheer on their guy. But I think there'll be a lot of people who watch it just to, maybe learn a bit. I think, at least I hope that's the way people sort of view it. I think these things can be really helpful. Like, you get a bit of an idea. Again, like what we were saying about the podcast before, there's not a lot of opportunities where the leader gets to speak for like a sustained period of time, and even fewer where you kind of get to directly compare the two. Like they're on the same stage, they're standing 2 feet apart. Like you can hear them, they get asked the same question: what's your plan for housing? What's your plan for cost of living? What's your plan for, energy bills or whatever? You don't often get a chance to hear them kind of like present their differing arguments and to pick which one you think is the best. So, I do kind of wonder, like, I mean, I hope people listen to it and kind of like make their minds up, because I think that they actually are, if not the most exciting thing to watch as a journalist or as a reporter, because I've heard Albanese and Dutton say these exact same things a million times before. Like, we listen to them give a press conference every single day. We hear them, we read the press releases they put out, we see what they put on social media. Like, they just hammer the same message a million times. Like, people talk about, there's this concept in sort of like political advertising. I'm sure it's in a broader like advertising thing as well, about like the vomit principle. Like, you have to say something, enough times that it makes you want to vomit until it sort of sinks into someone's brain. Like, it takes that long you have to hear the message, 10 times or whatever for it to sink into someone's brain. So they say the same things over and over and over again. And that's the reason why they want you to remember it eventually, rather than just go, what did Albo say about the fuel excise, or what did Dutton say about tax? Like, you want that they want it. They want you to hear them say that same thing 50 times.
Yeah, for sure. It has just occurred to me that I guess one of the big differences between like Australian debates and the US debates is that, like, in the US, you don't actually get the chance to hear those guys just argue, or those people just argue against each other, when it's like we have been seeing Dutton and Albo yell at each other for about 3 years now. Those clips are around
in the parliament. Yeah, that actually is a fair point. Yeah,
for sure. And we've got someone else asking, what are so people are talking about the health policies of the two major parties, and someone else previously had submitted a question earlier saying which party will do the most to protect the NDIS. Can you tell? I mean, I know those are slightly different topics, but can you talk to me about that?
Yes, so health is obviously a really important issue in this election. People, if you've seen any of the campaign ads from Labor, you probably would have seen a lot of stuff about Medicare, a lot of stuff about the urgent care clinics, bulk billing. You probably would have seen other like negative ads from Labor saying Dutton's going to cut all this health funding, right? So Labor traditionally is seen as a party that sort of cares about Medicare, cares about health policy a bit more. Like, those sort of like more social policies are kind of seen as more in Labor's bag, whereas the Liberals are kind of seen and more as defense, national security, like the economy, those sort of. Like, I'm not saying that's necessarily borne out in what happens, but like broadly, those are the two buckets that the two parties like to kind of campaign on, because they think that they're seen as the stronger manager on both on those like buckets of issues. The health one is really interesting because Labor, shortly before the election, I think about a month before the election, put out a very major policy, right? And it was, I think it was $8.5 billion to boost the incentives for GPs to bulk bill at their doctor's surgery. So I'm sure people would have been going to their local GP maybe in the last couple of years, and suddenly you've got to pay a gap fee, or the place that previously was free, you just show your Medicare card and you're getting bulk billed. They're asking you for a small fee or even a large fee. That's been happening all around the country. Like, if that's not happening to you, then you're very lucky. It's definitely happening to me, to people that I know.
I'm stockpiling illnesses. You have to get to 5.
You gotta wait until you can, like, I'm not going to the doctor for a cold. I've got a cold now. I apologize. I haven't gone to the doctor. I'm not going to go to the doctor for a $100 visit to tell me that I've got a cold. But and it is a really major issue. So $8.5 billion to incentivize GPs to basically bulk bill all their patients, right? Liberals within like 2 minutes matched it. So they said, we're going to do that. We're going to do exactly that. So there's been a couple of policies that the Liberals have matched. and you can, I would tell people, go and do your research, go and like compare the policies yourself about what you think is the better way forward. Health is a really interesting one, and I think the Labor Party is campaigning really strongly on health. If you've seen Albanese anywhere recently, you've probably seen a photo of him at a Medicare clinic or at a doctor's surgery or in a hospital or something like that. The NDIS one is really interesting as well, and this is not my particular expert area of knowledge. So I probably would say to people again, like, go and do your own reading on this. I don't want to tell you something that's wrong. But both parties, there is like a bipartisan sort of agreement that they're trying to not cut the NDIS, like the total funding, but kind of like limit the growth in the spending.
And the NDIS being, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, just for
correct.
It's the disability supports. The largest disability support system in Australia.
Yeah. So it might be that if you have a disability, you have to get accepted. You apply and get accepted into the NDIS, and they might give you funding or support or some contributions towards your wheelchair or towards care at home, or to have like a carer to come and give you a hand, or to help you with feed. There's a whole lot of different things that it can do. You might be able to get funding to help you if you're someone who's not very mobile, or you've got access issues. Maybe they would come and put a ramp into your house so you could get up or get, rather than stairs, or they would help you with your washing or your cooking or your cleaning and that sort of thing. There was all these concerns about the growth in the spending on the NDIS, and it's already one of the biggest items in the budget. It costs, again, I'm not going to put a number on it because I don't have the number in front of me. I don't want to get it wrong, but tens of billions, right? And it's very, very, very incredibly vital, incredibly like life-changing scheme for like thousands and thousands of people across the whole country. But the question is also, how do you pay for it? So both and it was on track to keep growing and growing and growing to be, I think, if not the biggest, one of the very top biggest items in the budget. And I was concerned about how Australia would pay for it, basically. So in this term of government, both parties got together and they kind of said, okay, well, we're going to strike an agreement to limit not the funding in total, but like limit the growth in funding. So it might have gone like this before, and now it's kind of going like that. They've kind of like flattened that graph, the curve or whatever. So I think broadly both parties are pretty similar on the NDIS. It is a relatively bipartisan position at the moment because it is just such a vital thing for so many people, and it changes so many lives. So, but again, I think if people are interested in it, go and read the policies of each individual parties. It's not my expert area, so I don't want to lead you astray.
And so, generally speaking, would you say that the Greens tend to be more in support of not curbing that more?
Look, I mean, on a lot of issues, the Greens want to spend a lot more money. They sort of explain it all away by saying, well, they're going to put massive taxes on big corporations, on very wealthy Australians, billionaires, and they have done all this modelling and all this parliamentary research saying that if you taxed, again, don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but they would tax corporations, big company taxes at a higher rate, much higher rate. They would get like royalties taxes from resources and minerals and that sort of thing. The Greens basically say we would pay for all these promises, dental into Medicare, more mental health treatments, more money for the NDIS, all this sort of stuff by taxing billionaires more. So that's how the Greens kind of say that they would pay for some of these big pie in the sky, big picture changes that they would like.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. And I was going to say, with the NDIS as well, I guess there's also the argument that the more support you provide to people, the more they can work and then pay taxes as well. So there's an offset there. Where have we got? We've got a smorgasbord to choose from. Maximonthi was asking on TikTok, do preferences on how to vote cards actually make a difference in how to vote? Do we know that? Is that something we can measure, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally the thought of people who like sort of polling experts, and the word is psophologist, which is a great word for Scrabble. There's a thought that I think it's about 10 to 15% of people kind of follow those how to vote. So again, like I said before, I would say to people, like, when you go to the polling booth, like, the Liberal person, Labor person, Greens person will give you these little bits of paper, right? And it says, vote one Greens, or vote one Labor, or vote one Liberal, or vote one Clive Palmer, whatever, and it will suggest to you which order you should put the rest of the people. So it might say vote Liberal number 2, vote Greens number 3, vote Clive Palmer number 4, vote Pauline Hanson number 5. That's a suggested thing. That's what the party would like you to do, because that is the optimal thing for that party. But you can vote whichever way you want. Like vote whichever you can vote like exactly how they say it. You can vote the opposite way to how they say it. But as long as you number all the boxes and you follow the instructions on the ballot paper, you can do whatever you want. And I think it's probably good to say to people, like, go out and make your own choices. Like, look up the parties, figure out which ones you like best. Maybe vote for the one that you like the least as your last option, right? Give the one that you hate the most the lowest number, or the biggest number. If there's like 10 parties on the ballot, maybe you hate party XYZ the most, you give the number 10, and you like party ABC the best, and you give the number 1. So I would do your own looking around and figure out which one you want to vote for.
Yeah, for sure. Don't try not to rock up on election day and have no idea of any of the names. I think is everyone's goal this year. I'm setting that as the homework. I think we have time for maybe one more little question, which was Random Panda Publicity was asking, is it possible that the Greens will actually get into power? And I know that this has been, I think, on social media a lot, talking about politics. This has been a big refrain that I've seen a lot personally, like in comments of people saying, you should stop talking about the two parties or the two candidates, which I guess I sort of argue when it comes to PM, there is only two candidates. But I was wondering, can you explain that? Like, is it a problem that we're sort of talking about it as if the Greens could never? Or is it, like a sort of Tinkerbell theory that, like, if people started talking about them more, they'd be more actually viable, if that makes sense? This is half a question, half my own thought bubble.
I mean, like any party, if you've got more than 75 people standing around the country, like they could get into government. I mean, One Nation could get into government. The Clive Palmer party could get into government. Like the Greens could get into government if 76 electorates around the country vote in a Greens member. Look, I mean, yeah, like there is that chance. Just the same as 76 electorates vote for Labor and they get in, or 76 vote for Liberals and they get in. Anyone can get in. I think it's obviously a long way to go until this, before the last election, before 2022, the Greens had one member in the lower house, right? They had a number of senators. They had like 10 or something 8 senators. They had one member in the lower house, which is Adam Bant. They now have 4. So they've quadrupled their membership in the lower house, which is where the government is decided, and they've got 4 people. So you need 76, 75. Long way to go. Who knows? Maybe one day in the future. Who knows where things all go? The Greens would have to obviously vastly grow their membership and grow their support base and that sort of thing. But yeah, like same as anyone could become the government if they get enough people elected. That's the way democracy works.
For sure, but it's a fairly stated goal by the Greens that they're aiming for minorities. Is that the correct? That like the Greens aren't sort of out here saying Adam Bant's going to be PM. They're sort of
no. Oh, sorry. If that was the question you were asking, sorry.
No, it was not. But I'm just asking now.
No, they've talked a lot about here's what the Greens talking a lot about. Here's what we would do if we were in minority government with Labor. So I think they're sort of rooting for that outcome. But I think as well, the other side of this too is at the start of the election, very few people were talking about Labor winning enough seats to govern in their own right. They're only on 78 now, so like they need 76. They can only really afford to lose a tiny handful. There is people are again. For like the 5th time, I'm not a betting person. I wouldn't bet on this outcome, but there is a bit more confidence among people in Labor that they might hang on and have government in their own right. They might have 76 MPs or more. Who knows? I think that's probably.
We were making what happens if there's a hung parliament videos the week before the last election.
And I think that still is the more likely outcome, to be honest. But like anything could happen here. Like like Labor could lose a bunch of seats to the Liberals, but they could also win a bunch of other ones back. So it's like you might lose 5 over here, but you might pick up 5 over there. It might be a different composition of the parliament. But actually, one prediction that I made like very early on, like sort of more towards the start of the year, we were sort of sitting around looking at a big map. This is what journalists do. We'll sit around looking at a big map of Australia with all the electorates on it, and we were sort of going, oh, which ones might flip, and to who would they go to? And we sat around. We did this whole big thing. You know, maybe Liberals win Brisbane, but maybe they lose Flinders, but they might pick up this, but they might lose Bradfield, and maybe Labor wins Sturt, and all these sort of things. And I said to someone at the start, like, you know, in about February, I said, you know, again, I'm not going to bet on this, but like, I wouldn't be shocked if we do this whole big campaign, we do 6 weeks of traveling, all this sort of stuff, and the parliament ends up pretty similar to what we have now, like Labor on mid to high 70s, Liberals on mid to high 50s, and about 20 on the crossbench. Like, I wouldn't be surprised after all this time if that is broadly where we end up. Like, Liberals might get into the 60s, Labor might get into the low 70s. Like, it could this election, I think, is really hard to predict because of the minor party vote. You don't know.
Oh, I think we may have lost poor Josh. He seems to have disappeared off the screen. Oh, he's back. So we lost you just for a brief second. I was terrified.
No, I think I lost you there for a second as well. I wasn't sure if we'd ended, but no, I'll wrap up and just say, look, this election is really hard to predict. Who knows what's going to happen? The minor party vote is really interesting. We don't really know where all those preferences will spray, so it could end up that the Liberals end up with broadly what they have now. Labor is basically what they have now, and you know,
and you will have just lost 5 weeks of sleep for nothing.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, which would be great.
For sure. Thank you so much, Josh. This has been a really awesome chat, and I appreciate you taking the time in your unbelievably busy schedule. And the chat does as well. Okay, see you all. We will be back next week. Hopefully, probably. There's still time. Bye.